Hello, welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Young Kim. During the annual security meeting in Seoul, U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin agreed with his South Korean counterpart to establish a new war plan, citing North Korea's destabilizing weapons program. The announcement came as Washington just concluded a 9-month review of the global defense posture, calling for more cooperation from allies in order to counter threats from North Korea as well as China. Today, we'll discuss what the Biden administration prioritizes in its global strategy. Joining me is Joseph Detrani. Ambassador Detrani served as a special envoy for the six-party talks and as the director of the National Counterproliferation Center. He spent over 2 decades with the Central Intelligence Agency as a member of the Senior Intelligence Service. Scott Snyder is also with me today. Mr. Snyder is director of the U.S.-Korea policy at the Council on Foreign Relations. His latest book, South Korea at the Crossroads, charts the evolution of South Korean foreign policy and strategic choices. Welcome to the program. Good to have you both today.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin just finished his 3-day visit to South Korea. After holding the Allies' annual Security Consultative Meeting, SCM, Secretary Austin and South Korean Defense Minister Seo said they agreed to set up a new policy that guides their respective militaries, which is called the Strategic Planning Guidance. Ambassador, what is the significance of this strategic planning guidance?
Well, thank you for the invitation to be here with you and to discuss these important issues. Look, this is very significant. The strategy planning guidance is talking about the reality of today, living in the Northeast Asia region, and what are the critical issues. And you mentioned China a minute ago, and obviously that's a critically important issue, as is North Korea. So it's a question of ensuring the language that was used in the joint communique, ensuring that we have the deterrence necessary to address the potential of Chinese military, incursions and threats from North Korea. So I think just putting that together and reiterating our commitment to the Republic of Korea, our extended deterrence commitments to include nuclear deterrence, the reconfirming the 28,500 troops, repositioning again the helicopter squadron permanently to the Republic of Korea, as is the artillery division. I think overall it's a very important statement to certainly North Korea, but also to China. But it brings the U.S. and South Korea that much closer together on some of these more pervasive generic threats in the region.
Mr. Snyder, why was this guidance established in the first place? Does this guide actually guided both the U.S. and South Korean military forces?
Yes, the strategic planning guidance is really the framework around which the top military commanders develop war plans. But I want to step back because Ambassador Detrani made some important points. This joint statement, I think, reads very interestingly compared to past joint statements, in part because of its mention of the Indo-Pacific and its mention of China. And so I would just point out that as the defense secretaries did their survey of developments to respond to in the region, they talked about North Korean missile developments, but they also talked about the need to prepare for quote-unquote omnidirectional threats. And omnidirectional, I think, is a code word for dealing with the China maritime challenge.
Right. Actually, I was going to ask both of you about China, but then let me first ask you about North Korean issue. So the Pentagon official earlier said the existing war plan is nearly 10 years old, and the U.S. has been seeing the progress in North Korean military capabilities. especially with regards to missiles. So, Mr. Snyder, you just mentioned about the missile capabilities of North Korea. Does this mean that the existing war plan was outdated in terms of dealing with North Korea's current capability?
Well, I think that outdated is a bit of a loaded word. I think that there is a need to update the plans. And so the way I would think of it is more like receiving a new operating system for your mobile phone. The plans have been there, but they need to be revised and updated to account for the latest developments. And so it's clear that there is an intent to do that. And I think the primary focus is on, it should be and will be on the areas where North Korea has made improvements in its capabilities to ensure that there is an appropriate allied response. And of course, that's also very important as an aspect of deterrence to deny North Korea the capability to attack.
Right. Ambassador Detrani, so we can assume that this new guidance is to reflect the current environment on the Korean Peninsula.
Yeah, there's no question about it. In 2017, we saw the North Koreans launching an intercontinental ballistic missile, the Hwasong-14, the Hwasong-15, then displaying even a more gigantic ICBM, Hwasong-16, and having a thermonuclear test. So yes, there's no question about it. And we've seen it recently also, right? Even though they haven't launched an ICBM or had a nuclear test within the past 2 years, we've seen what they've done with submarine-launched ballistic missiles, hypersonic missiles, launching from rail cars. So there's no question that this had to be updated. And I think we were prepared, the corporate we, South Korea and the United States, were prepared even before, if you will, the strategic planning, new guidelines. But I think it makes it that much more explicit, and certainly to North Korea, that the Republic of Korea and the United States are very mindful of what's going on in North Korea.
All right. North Korea has been displaying its nuclear and missile capabilities for years now. Ambassador, why is the need to get a new plan is now brought up during this administration and not during the previous administration?
I think the Biden administration is really a lot of focus on allies and strategic partners. And in this case, we're talking about our closest ally, the Republic of Korea. So I think it's a very powerful statement that the United States will be working closely with allies and strategic partners to deter threats. And in this case, we're talking about the Northeast Asia region, but obviously it goes beyond Northeast Asia, but focus being on the Indo-Pacific region. So yeah, I think it's a powerful statement, and it's different than the previous administration that was more unilateral, bilateral. Now we're talking about a significant multilateral approach.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Snyder, does this show that the Biden administration has a different approach towards the Korean Peninsula compared to the previous administration?
Well, I think that what the defense secretaries are really focusing on is the institutional policy process. And I'm not sure that there is a great difference in that aspect between Trump and Biden. Except that we have greater assurance that the White House is going to pay attention to the process. And so what I see as going on is really the return of process as an element of policy implementation, as an important element of policy implementation that provides greater consistency in U.S. behavior and provides greater assurance to U.S. allies.
Mm-hmm. Ambassador Detrani, from North Korean perspective, what will this new strategic planning guidance imply?
Well, I think there are two messages. One is come back to negotiations, focus on diplomacy and dialogue, mentioning past agreements with North Korea. I think that's a powerful statement from the Republic of Korea and the United States. But failing that, to ensure that there's significant, appropriate deterrence capabilities between the two allies, so as to indeed deter North Korea from using what we've seen over the years, any of their missiles and nuclear weapons, and but I would say other weapons of mass destruction. We look at the cyber and some of the other things they've been doing. So yeah, I think it's a powerful statement to North Korea. But again, I think the default here is come back to negotiations.
Do you think this new plan, will affect the dynamics in the inter-Korean relationship in any way?
In terms of the inter-Korean relationship, I think that maybe the major aspect that could have an influence on the inter-Korean relationship is that the defense planning process involves an affirmation that the U.S. and South Korea have the same view of North Korean capabilities and intentions. And to that extent, it's possible that the focus on the defense planning process and the war plans could generate more complaints from North Korea about what it terms South Korean double standards of trying to reach out to North Korea while at the same time building capabilities that could be used against North Korea. And so I think that could come into play. But we have to remember that this is an institutional process that has been going on for decades as the centerpiece for alliance cooperation. I mean, the main focus of the defense relationship has been on ensuring that the U.S. and South Korea have a combined capability that is capable of deterring war.
And U.S. President Joe Biden has recently approved the Global Posture Review recommendations formed by the Secretary Austin. Mr. Snyder, is it right to understand that this U.S.-South Korea strategic planning guidance plan is consistent with this review?
Yeah, I think the way that I look at that is that the strategic planning guidance is really part of the bottom-up, building from the ground to focus on a particular threat. And the Global Posture Review is about a top-down process that identifies strategic objectives globally and then tries to pursue them. And really, if we step back and look at what is happening, I think the most remarkable development impacting the alliance is really that the U.S. shift from a focus on counterterrorism to major power rivalry is having a major impact on the context for the alliance operations. And when we really think about what that means, for counterterrorism, what that often meant is that the U.S. was asking South Korea for assistance to conduct out-of-area operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. But if our focus is on major power rivalry and the chief competitor is China, it basically means that the U.S.-South Korea alliance becomes a centerpiece for an inflow of focus and resources toward the efforts to accomplish that objective. And that also means that South Korea has to be on board with the U.S. approach. And so I think that is a critical component of the Biden administration's focus on revitalization of the alliance.
Mm-hmm.
It's also a realization that South Korea is on board on these generic geostrategic issues. There's no question about that. And indeed, when we talk about China and Taiwan, ensuring stability in the Taiwan Strait, peace and stability there, and also the threat from North Korea, there's no question there and everything. But we have to be very mindful, and of course we are, that China is a major trading partner, the major trading partner with the Republic of Korea. That China, but South Korea, in my view, doesn't want to show that they're just siding with the U.S. In principle, they agree with all these geostrategic issues with the United States, and we're totally in sync on that. But there's no coincidence that as we have our Secretary of Defense in Seoul, the National Security Advisor Soo-hoon is in Beijing meeting with Yang Jie-shi, who's a member of the Politburo and runs their Foreign Affairs Council. So I think this is where South Korea is navigating between these two great powers, and making it clear that on principle they're with us on these issues with Taiwan and peace in the region and stability and the threat from North Korea, but they also want to maintain a good relationship with the People's Republic of China.
Mm-hmm. As the ambassador mentioned, the joint statement just released from Seoul mentioned the importance of preserving peace and security in the Taiwan Strait, to which China's Yang Jiechi showed his concern. Mr. Snyder, what did you make of this? Do you think that the mention of the Taiwan Strait was very meaningful?
Well, the most significant mention was, of course, in the joint statement last May, and I think that the Defense Secretary communique is really just following up on that. But it does suggest that there is a deeper conversation to be had between the U.S. and South Korea on the specific measures that would be necessary to achieve that objective. And Ambassador Detrani is right that South Korea is walking a very complicated tightrope between the U.S. and China as it tries to keep open its diplomatic options. And it's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out. It looks like the Chinese supported the end of war declaration, and so that is notable because we don't know precisely how the U.S. and South Korea have come to what form of agreement over that issue. But it's a delicate issue that clearly from a South Korean perspective involves the need to cooperate with China, where the overall tenor of U.S. policy towards China is, it doesn't preclude cooperation on that kind of issue, but it clearly has more of an adversarial tone under the Biden administration.
Mm-hmm. Ambassador, you said that South Korea will be navigating in terms of its options, dealing with China and maintaining its alliance with the U.S. Do you think South Korea and U.S., the alliance, will it be able to extend its scope beyond Korean Peninsula?
I think this strategic guidance, I think it's appropriate. It's putting a marker down on the need to come back to negotiations and dialogue, but it's also making it clear that we have to live in the world we're living in now, and that's looking at North Korea building more nuclear and missile capabilities and ensuring that we have a significant deterrence capability with our ally in South Korea to deter any threats from the North, while also making it very clear to China, I might say, that we're talking about peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. So a lot of complex issues, but I think the Biden administration has taken this on and is moving very diligently in a positive direction with our allies, and especially our allies in South Korea.
Mm-hmm. And just my last question, I'll go quickly. So some people see the completion of the Global Defense Posture Review as President Biden's first major initiation is in his diplomatic strategy. And it requires close cooperation from allies and partners. And right now, South Korea is at a time when it is preparing itself for the next administration. Ambassador, wouldn't this circumstance make the allies face some challenges or delays in implementing this?
No, I don't think so. I think it's some of our allies. I think, and again, we alluded to it or we mentioned it previously. Certainly with South Korea, China is their major trading partner, and they obviously want to maintain good relations. But there's no reason why both can't be accomplished. I think the threat coming out of North Korea, and we talked about that briefly, is very significant. And the fact that North Korea is not coming back to negotiations, that also is very significant. So where does that leave us? And then we talked about the peace and security in the Taiwan Strait. That is a flashpoint, and that could lend itself to something. So it may not be convenient for our allies and strategic partners to be getting into these issues right now, but that's the reality. There should be no ambiguity with North Korea or anyone out there as to the close allied relationship and how we are in sync, not only on issues related to North Korea, but issues related to the region and peace and security in the region.
Mr. Snyder, your last thoughts about what do you expect to see in the process?
Well, this is an institutional planning process. It really represents the backbone of our security cooperation between the U.S. and South Korea. And I think that it is relatively depoliticized, and it should remain so in the context of the South Korean election. And so, that political process may put, some flesh on the bones, but in terms of what we're actually doing institutionally that really binds the two countries together, I do not see a great risk at this moment of that being subject to political contest in the South Korean presidential election.
North Korea will hold another key party meeting later this month to discuss plans for the new year as the country continues to grapple with the struggling economy. This month's plenary session, which marks the fourth this year alone, will be closely watched as the regime will likely suggest where its future policies are headed. Ambassador Detrani and Mr. Snyder, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that does it for this week's Washington Talk from Voice of America. Please join us again next week for more analysis.